Welcome. Hi. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jay Hodges. I'm a proud friend of Sinn Féin's. There have been some recent developments going on. The British government has brought forth some proposals which amount basically to a cover-up of atrocities that have been committed in the last 50 years. And so there's a lot of confusion going on with it. So what we wanted to do was kind of bring in somebody that could clarify things, could kind of offer up what was really going on and kind of help us see the forest for the trees in this situation. So without further ado, I want to bring back Brother John Finucane. Brother, how are you doing, man?
I'm very well. I'm very well. Good to be speaking with you today, Jay.
Well, thank you so much for taking time. This is a complex issue. This is something that we just need to understand a little bit better. So can we just start with the background on this? Like, what is being proposed? Kind of how did it come about? Like, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, the British government have talked for some time around looking at legacy. They have been making some very inflammatory and also inaccurate statements around their own British soldiers and prosecutions that have been taken over the past number of years. So in that backdrop, the Secretary of State, Brandon Lewis, made an announcement in Westminster a number of weeks ago. And what he proposed, what he set out, was the British government's way of dealing with the past. Now, in my experience of dealing with anything legacy related or anything to do with our conflict, I am struggling to think of any time where everybody's voice has been united in condemnation and opposition to what the British government are doing. And that extends not just amongst the political parties here, but also victims themselves and victims groups. What is being proposed is an attack on the law. It's effectively ripping up human rights, and it's also ripping up any chance that families would have to get truth or to get justice. They are proposing that all criminal prosecutions, any live ones, would be stayed. They would stop. There would be no future criminal prosecutions. But also further than that, there wouldn't be any inquests. We wouldn't have any investigations by the police ombudsman, and there wouldn't be any civil proceedings either. Essentially, there would be no judicial mechanism for a family or a loved one to pursue truth and justice and accountability. And that is irrespective as to who the perpetrator was that would have resulted in your loss. That this will affect everybody across the board. And that's why there has been a unified voice on this of condemnation and of anger. I mean, I've been in meetings with victims groups and victims, and certainly as a party, we have been engaging with them. Mary Lou McDonald and Michelle O'Neill hosted meetings where we met people in Belfast recently on the back of this announcement. And people are genuinely very hurt by this. Some families are waiting decades to get an inquest. And the inquest, just for your listeners, is the mechanism by which the Ballymurphy families had such a spectacular result earlier on this year. It was through that inquest process that they were able to prove after 50 years that their loved ones were innocent. That's going to go. That will literally go at the stroke of a pen, and no family will be able to access that again. So it's inflicted a lot of hurt. People are very suspicious, and people are naturally angry at what the British government are doing.
So can we? You brought up Ballymurphy, and I think that's a great way to talk about this. Could you just very briefly take through what happened with Ballymurphy and kind of go through all, and then talk about kind of how this would and just eliminate that? I mean, it wouldn't even damage it. It wouldn't even exist anymore. Because I think that's a great example, and I think it makes it easier to understand.
Yeah. So the Ballymurphy families have been campaigning effectively for 50 years. They, for decades, had been told by the state, the official narrative was that, the soldiers' actions were justified, that there were gunmen and gunwomen amongst the dead. And, very similarly to Bloody Sunday, they had to fight, and they had to do that through a court process. And earlier on this year, when we saw the judgment from the court, and that was through the ability of the families and their lawyers to cross-examine British soldiers, get access to documentation, be able to take part in a process themselves. And the court completely vindicated their loved ones. The court essentially agreed with the case that had been put forward by the families and their loved ones. Even since this announcement from the British Secretary of State, we've seen the publication of a police ombudsman report into the murder of an 18-year-old in West Belfast in the 1990s, a guy called Damien Walsh. That report showed that there was collusion in that young fella's murder. A day or two after that, we saw our High Court in Belfast deliver a judgment in the context of the Omagh bomb, which said that the Omagh bomb should have been prevented due to intelligence failures. All of that I've just described will not happen in the future. It's not a case of it will be a watered down version or it might take a little bit longer. It will not happen. People will not have the legal ability to seek recourse through the police ombudsman, through the inquest system, through our High Court here in Belfast. And, you know, that has really jolted people, even academics. We engaged as a party with academics from Queen's School of Law, and they are saying that this goes further than what Pinochet did in Chile in the 1970s. This goes further than what Spain tried to introduce as well. And both of those countries have rolled back from that and are trying to unravel and unpick the damage that type of amnesty caused. This goes even further. You know, whilst we live legacy here to a large extent, I mean, take a step back. This is essentially a settled Western democracy, saying there can be no transparent analysis or investigation into what they were doing in this part of Ireland for 40 or 50 years. And, you know, it strikes me that whenever they fight so hard, you know, the Ballymurphy families, their success was in spite of, not because of the actions of the British government. You know, the British government fought them tooth and nail in the courts. But if you think about how hard they will fight to deny the truth around men in uniform shooting anything that moved, whether it's on the streets of Derry or the streets of Belfast, I think for me what this is about is not just those people in uniform, but it's the people in suits. It's the people in, you know, buildings with no windows, those who were directing policies such as collusion that resulted in, you know, widespread death right across society here, and the political accountability and the infrastructure around that's what the British government fear here, and they don't want the courts, they don't want families having that ability to access that. So I think that's the motivation in this. I think people see it for what it is, and there hasn't been anybody outside of the British government themselves that's come forward to say, do you know what, this is a really good idea. You know, as I'm saying repeatedly, I acknowledge this is just, it's one message with different voices. It's, you know, it's wrong. They need to take this off the table. But they have said they have a commitment that they're going to legislate for this in the autumn time.
So I'm just, it's kind of crazy to me that this doesn't feel like it's about, having been in politics my entire life and whatnot, the very common political response would be, this is about, you know, allowing everybody to move forward, clean slates, everybody gets to, you know, there's no, you know, there's nothing on either side, like we're just going to let everybody move forward. That'd be the statement that I would normally be used to hearing or whatnot coming out, but it feels much more like this is about making sure that those of us that were the decision makers and the shot callers are not ever going to be held accountable for what we were instructing people to go do. I certainly don't excuse anybody for following an order that they know for a fact is incorrect. I think that is that's important, but I feel like this is a way for me, who was in power, to kind of, you know, to forgive myself and say, oh, well, look, now nothing can happen to me or whatnot. Am I just wrong? Is that too much of a movie plot, or is that really kind of what it seems like?
Yeah, you know, even if you take that a little bit and address it, you know, we need to move on. Society needs to move on. We need to heal, and we need to look forward. Nobody argues against that. You know, I've never met anybody who's been impacted by the conflict or any of the groups that advocate on their behalf. I don't think anybody wants to hold the present or the future to hostage until the past is dealt with on their terms. It's not that at all. And one thing that I haven't mentioned yet, which is crucial and really important in all of this, is that we came to a political agreement 7 years ago as to how we would deal with the past. The political parties and the two governments made an agreement which is referred to as the Stormont House Agreement, and that had the structures as to how we would look at our past. And the two aren't mutually exclusive. You know, I'm a firm believer that we can examine and deal with our past whilst also building a strong today, and also looking to build a stronger future as well for the benefit of everybody. What you can't do is just pull the curtain down and say that nobody's allowed to look there, because that doesn't enhance reconciliation, that doesn't enhance closure. What that does is just inject even more hurt into a process and into people's lives that's already, that people are already living with this. We see generational impact from legacy. Again, citing the Ballymurphy family struggle. There's grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those who were killed in Ballymurphy at that time, who are marching and who are advocating. I think of myself, I was 8 years old whenever my father was murdered. My eldest is going to be going to university here in a couple of months. So, we don't necessarily want to keep having to do this and saddle next generations with it. But until we deal with this, until we deal with our legacy, then that's going to be the case. And, when have we talked before about the British government not implementing agreements? It's a familiar pattern of what is essentially and fast becoming, or already is, a rogue state. But the British government didn't implement on Stormont House. And I think that if there is discussions around, can it be improved? Can it be strengthened? Can it be tweaked? I think all political parties would have been up for that conversation. What we see now is something completely different, something that is being interpreted as a very cynical and self-serving proposal. So I think that where we are now with this is that we have political consensus. There's consensus amongst the victims. And I think we need that international spotlight on the British government. We need the attention from the human rights world, from the legal world. We need that international attention, particularly in America, as well.
I just want to, you brought up the Stormont Agreement, and I just want it for the American audience. I just want to point out that the House and Senate bipartisan passed support resolutions for it, and the administration, the White House, has actually been very vocal about, we have these things in place, like we need to go ahead and use them. So, our support in the States, at least from our government standpoint, would lean much more against this. I would also like to point out that this is one of those times where, if this was a dictatorship in some other part of the world, the United States, England would come out in harsh, that's not fair, that's not right. Like we would speak adamantly out against this. It should not be any different just because it's an ally. We have to call our friends when things go on. So I want to wrap up with just kind of what the impact for this is potentially, and then also just kind of what the path is laying forward. I know you mentioned that they're going to talk about it in the fall. And so what kind of between now and then can we do as an audience to kind of make sure that this is being looked at by our leadership, or by, how can we help? What can we do?
Yeah, well, so the time frame is that the British government have said they will introduce legislation. At the minute, the status of what they have said is their proposal. They are keen to say that this is just a proposal, and they want to have conversations around this. All of the conversations that I've listened to is not about engaging in any credible way with what they're suggesting. It's an outright rejection of it. So what can we do about that? Well, the political parties have made their position very clear. I think certainly from the American side on this, I would urge your listeners, contact your local representative, whether that's your senator, whether that's your congressman, and make sure that this is on their radar, because this isn't, one, it impacts on our peace here. But this is also an issue of human rights. It's about accountability. It's about upholding the rule of law. And, what country more than the United Kingdom have built its reputation on upholding the rule of law? What they are doing now is effectively one of the most crassest and crudest ways of undermining that. So I think having that mobilization from America, having that spotlight from America on the British government and what they are attempting to do, this is something that is really without precedent. So I would urge your listeners to get that political buy-in from your representatives. Make sure that this is an issue that is front and center, particularly for American foreign policy and particularly on their policy on the UK and Ireland, because the United Kingdom currently are treating victims with contempt, but they always exercise caution whenever America, makes noises. We saw that in the context of a hard border in Ireland, in the context of the outworkings of Brexit. And I think this is of equal importance. This is something that has a huge impact on our society here. And I think it does deserve that level of attention from America.
Well, John, I want to say thanks for taking the time. I know it's a busy time for you, and I very much appreciate you coming on and kind of walking us through this event. You continue to be an inspiration to me personally. I just admire everything you've gone through and how you just continue to move forward. And you always are very positive on the outlook of things. It would be very, very easy to be bitter and angry, and I've never heard you be that way. And so I just continue to love listening to you talk about these kinds of things. It's refreshing and it's awesome. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Jay.
I would encourage everybody out there to do exactly that. We need to get in touch with our representatives. We need to get in touch with our senators. We need to let them know that we do not support what is being proposed and what is being moved forward. And, we need to share this video around, and it needs to be put out far and wide. And this is one of those times where a very small action on ourselves can actually have a very large impact. So I'm hoping that you will share this video and you will talk about it to your friends and to your families, but also that you will reach out and make contact with your local electeds to make sure that they are aware of what is going on. Again, my name is Jay Hodges, and I'm a proud friend of Sinn Féin's. I want to thank you for joining us. We will look forward to seeing you again soon. Slán.